I did a video a while back on how to make a computer case out of PVC pipes. At that time, I took apart a desktop computer to demonstrate how a very basic computer could work using this case. Today, I'm going to build a new computer from scratch for myself using this same case. I'll tell you more about my new computer next. The computer I'm building today will be built around this MSI Bazooka motherboard. As usual, I'll be on a budget. Not a strict budget, but nothing really high-end, flashy, or color coordinated. Simple with reasonable performance will do. Because of how the motherboard is mounted to the PVC case, there's a little more effort needed to get things lined up, but it's not too much harder. I did have some trouble with my butterfingers constantly dropping the screws, and it didn't help that the screws were stainless steel, so having a magnetic screwdriver was of no help. I've seen other YouTube videos where some parts are mounted on the motherboard before the motherboard is mounted in the case. For myself, because this build will move along over a period of months as I slowly acquire parts, I'm going to mount the parts as I buy them. For the type of case I have, problems with accessibility for mounting parts shouldn't become a problem. The next item I'll be installing is this EVGA 750 watt power supply. It's not one of those modular ones where it has empty ports available for plugging in only the cables you need. I had thought about getting one of those, but realized if you have a case with room to spare, having excess cables I won't use should be okay. Besides, the pre-cabled power supply was a lot cheaper than the modular one by almost half. I have the motherboard taking up one of the levels of my case. On a separate level will be most, if not the rest, of the cabled accessories. Things like the power supply, external GPU, drives, anything that doesn't need to be plugged directly into the motherboard will go on this separate level. The only thing that would go on a separate level, separate from this level I just mentioned, would be if I had decided to get water cooling. If I eventually add water cooling in the future, the tank and the pump will be on the bottom level. This way, I'd only have to worry about leaks from the conduits getting into the computer's electronics. When I mount the power supply, I like it to not be secured permanently in place until the full computer build is completed. This gives me the flexibility to slide the power supply around to a location beneath the motherboard where all the power cables can easily be plugged in without any one cable being pulled too tight. As demonstrated here, sliding the power supply to different locations can be a benefit to cable runs through different pathways, as well as changing space considerations for additional accessories that could mount alongside the power supply. For the motherboard mounted parts, I'll start with the CPU, which is pretty simple. Flip up the locking lever, gently drop and wiggle the CPU till it falls into place, then move the locking lever to its original position to lock the CPU in place. For my needs, the included heatsink and fan should suffice. Mounting is straightforward. Remove the placeholder brackets which hold a mounting plate that's underneath the motherboard. While holding the mounting plate in place, screw the heatsink into it. I'm not familiar with mounting a heatsink, so I'm going to bottom out the screws till it just barely cannot turn anymore. I don't think they need to be torqued down at all. RAM is always pretty easy to mount. It can only be plugged in facing one way, so you'd know if it's been plugged in the wrong way. I'm installing 32 GB of RAM, a lot more than I've ever needed before, but I should be able to put it to good use. I want to get this Samsung M.2 storage eventually, but I'm waiting to see what the price will drop to in the next month or two. In the meantime, I'll install this 512 GB SSD. I'm not too worried about the performance of the storage device, so if this SSD works out in everyday use, I may skip getting the M.2. Now that I have this system almost completed, it's time to secure the individual levels together. To do so, I'm going to use these ball bungee cords. One to hold each of the corners should keep the entire case together. If the case ever gets too heavy for the bungees, I could tie a knot in the bungee to increase the tension on the case. Going by this set of wires from the power button, the white wires seem to be the negative. I'll use that knowledge to connect these jumper connections to the JFP1 jumper specified in these instructions for the motherboard. At this point, I can install Windows. I have a bootable USB drive that I created from the Microsoft site. I'll boot from it and it'll do the Windows 10 install by downloading and installing the files as they're needed. Because of my minimal internet bandwidth of 35 megabits per second and the fact that the Windows install files are gigabytes in size, the install will take a while. I usually let it run and go do something else. Luckily for me, my primary computer isn't this computer. I have an Android tablet for that. A link to a video of that computer is in the description to this video. In the process of building this computer, there were some parts that were mentioned, but you didn't get to see the final steps I took to complete the installation. I'll quickly glance over some of these to give you some mounting ideas that worked for me on this PVC computer case. One item I've still not purchased yet, but definitely plan to, is the GPU. It's halfway through 2021 and GPUs are still too expensive for my wallet. I'll probably check back in about 3 months, and again if needed in 6 months. I've currently got the system set up for my son, whose system requirements aren't too extreme. He's not into too many high bandwidth resource intensive games, although he does do some streaming, but he's been okay for now. I hope this project has given you some interesting ideas for a custom PVC computer case for your next desktop. Leave your questions and comments in the comment section below. That's all I have for now, and I'll catch you in the next video.